Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rarely Typical, a podcast where I am talking about living life with a chronic illness, finding hope, and living a life that is rarely typical. Today, I'm joined by my husband, Jason, and we are going to be chatting about our journey that got us to Colorado and eventually diagnosis, what that looked like for our marriage, and what it's like to be a caregiver to somebody with a chronic illness. Hello, Jason.
How's it going? I'm Jason. Glad to be here today.
Today, we are going to be talking about how we ended up in Colorado. And it's actually a really funny story. Originally, us going to Colorado was because of Jason's job. I had just had the boys, and we were probably like 6 months after the kids were born. And it was not what I was expecting, and it was not what I wanted to happen. So I'll let Jason tell it because he probably tells it a little better than me.
So, we're looking at probably the last 9 months to 12 months of my active duty contract. And during that time, I was putting together a warrant officer packet for flight. My plan was at the time to stay active and go warrant. However, the last bullet on the application, it says you must have a year retainability. And I didn't have that at the time. I went ahead and just start the out processing where during that you have to visit a bunch of different places and basically get a signature saying you stopped by, you talked to them, and continue on with the packet. And I still remember one of the last stops I stopped at, you have to go talk to a reserve or National Guard recruiter, essentially for them to give you their pitch to see if you want to continue serving or not. I went and talked to the guy, went in already knowing that I wasn't going to go this route. I started talking to him and I saw he had a poster you can go warrant in the reserve side. So I asked him about that and he told me a little bit about it. And I told him I had a packet about 95% done. And he said, "Oh, let me go take a look at it." And I showed it to him and he said, "Great, I'll send this up. And if you had to choose where you wanted to go, where do you want to go?" And I was actually taken aback that I actually had a choice on where to go. And so at the time, he gave me two options. One was Florida and the other was Colorado. And I still remember he had the television on behind him. And I looked up, and that was when I don't know if you remember back in 2017 ish that this hurricane, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but the path was to basically form an S through Florida. And I was praying, God, where do you want me to go after this active duty? And here I am presented with this opportunity to go back to a state that I really enjoyed growing up in St. Augustine, going down to the Gulf in Florida. However, when I saw that hurricane and having Gerry and the boys were just a few months old at the time, I figured I'm leaning more towards Colorado now. Never been there, don't know anybody there. And I figured what better opportunity to go out there if we use it for flight. Now, the funny thing is, this wasn't a guarantee that I got this job out there. I was essentially applying in hopes of getting the job in Colorado. So, just to paint it all in one big picture, I could have either just extended my contract the easy route and I would have a guaranteed paycheck, place to stay, food on the table for the next 3 years, or absolutely gamble my entire foreseeable future on the hopes of getting a job in a brand new state in a place we don't know anybody. And I chose that one because that's one I honestly felt led to. Needless to say, Jerry was a little shocked when I came home that day from doing the out processing. I came home and I said, "Jerry, I feel like we're being led to go to Colorado. I don't have a job over there yet. And I applied for a position over there. And we won't know if I got the job until we get there."
He says it like it was okay, but really, he came home in the middle of the day, and any military wife knows that if he comes home in the middle of the day, it's bad news. So, he came home in the middle of the day, and he sat down, and I remember I just put the boys down for a nap, and he said, "Hey, we gotta talk," and I was like, "What?" And he was like, "I feel led to Colorado," and I was immediately like, "No." And I was like, "Are you crazy? Our family and our friends are here. We have never lived in Colorado. We don't know anybody in Colorado. Why do you wanna go to Colorado?" And he was like, "I don't know. I just feel like I'm being led to go to Colorado, so I applied for this position, and if I get it, then we might have to go." And I just remember being like, "I don't know about that." And he was like, "Just pray about it." And we did. And then we ended up in Colorado. Okay, so we moved to Colorado. We get there. Jason has to move an entire apartment to a different apartment because it was not the apartment that we originally thought that we were going to have. He drove there across the country with his stepdad, and I flew with the boys, which all by itself is a different podcast. But we get there, and I am so tired. And when you fly into altitude, supposedly it makes the altitude sickness worse than if you drive because it's a gradual change. And so after we got there, I was really tired and I had twin babies at home. It is natural to be tired, to be postpartum and be struggling. And so honestly, I didn't think too much about it. And you guys have heard my diagnosis story about 1,000 times at this point. So if you haven't, you can go back to a different episode and listen to that. But I was just really struggling. And a lot of the time, we were just excusing it for other things. There were a bunch of times when I couldn't even get to the trailhead. Or I remember we parked our car in Manitou Springs and we walked maybe 2 blocks. And I was like, I got to take a break. Like, I got to sit down. And Jason was like, "Okay." I mean, we could still see our car. And he was pushing the stroller. I was literally just walking. And I just remember feeling like I was so out of shape, like something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And eventually, when I did get my diagnosis, I woke up that morning and I said, "Jason, I got to go to the ER." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "I don't feel great and I think something's wrong." And I think from his perspective, and I guess he can tell you that, but it was just funny because I had not gone to the eye doctor or the dentist in years. And then for me to turn around and say I needed to go to the ER that day, I think was a really weird statement to come out of my mouth. And I said, I just think something's wrong. And I was like, I just need to go. And he said, "Okay, I got to work later." And I was like, "I'll be home in a few hours, I guess, after they tell me what's wrong." And so I drove myself to the ER and I left Jason at home with the boys that morning. Do you remember what that was like when I called you and told you that I was going to be in the hospital for a while, that they were admitting me?
So you may have to forgive me because that whole beginning phase of the whole diagnosis, I don't remember a whole lot of specifics or details, just the kind of the big gnarly ones, which we'll get into here probably in a second.
Honestly, it was a blur for both of us because we were literally just surviving as parents. We were also barely surviving financially in Colorado. And then I get this diagnosis. So it's pretty fair that he doesn't remember a lot of it, but I remember it because it was obviously a very core memory for me. So after I spend 10 days in the local hospital, I get out. We decide we're going on a trip for Jason's birthday to Breckenridge. I was told that was not a good idea, but we did it anyway. So we went to Breck and we had a great time. And we did pretty much nothing because I was so sick. And when we got back, I went to see the specialist in Denver, and Dr. H obviously was the doctor that day. And something exciting that I'm looking forward to doing is we are going to talk about how he ended up in Colorado in correlation to how we ended up in Colorado. So it'll be a really cool crossover story. But Antras had just gotten to Colorado 3 weeks before I saw him. And so when I went in, I did all the questions. At the end, they ask you, "Do you have specific religious beliefs?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." And he said, "Oh, cool, me too." And then he kept going. And I remember thinking that was pretty weird, but whatever. And at the end of the conversation, he was like, "I want to admit you in. I think that we need to run our own tests, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Can I pray for you?" And I said, "Sure." I think I was like a little taken aback because like doctors normally don't pray for you. And so I had driven myself up there. And so he prayed over me and he prayed that I would find answers and that there would be healing and that I would have peace about everything going forward. And I remember being so emotionally taken back. And I got in the car and I was driving home by myself. And I remember just driving and crying. And I remember where I was on that interstate, which was, like, by, like, where the Denver IKEA is, and I remember just bawling my eyes out and just praying, "If this is where you want me to be, if this is what we're doing, I need you to speak to me." And I think in hindsight, looking back at that, I think that was the moment that I realized that God was working in our story, and I just didn't know how yet, but I did feel like maybe this is the moment that maybe it was me that was led to Colorado because we were seeing specialists. We were seeing one of the best specialists in the country. And I was so thankful for a doctor who prayed for me. And it was just crazy because I did not expect it. And then when he prayed over me, it was just like confirmation that God was in it. And so I self admitted we were supposed to run tests. It was supposed to be like 2 days and it ended up not being 2 days, it ended up being, like, 2 weeks, and I remember getting the bad diagnosis. So, if you've heard my diagnosis story, you've heard that the local hospital diagnosed me with mild PH and mild heart failure. One of the PAs working with Huntress at the time told me that it was bad. So he came in and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know, like, your blood work and your echo came back bad, and we actually need to redo all of this stuff tomorrow." And when the echo came back the second time, it came back really bad, and he basically came in and he told me, "Hey, if you don't start this treatment immediately, you could die." And he was like, "And if you don't start treatment immediately, you probably have a year or 2 to live." And I remember being so upset in the hospital room, and I was, like, by myself because Jason's still at home taking care of the boys, and I called him because what else do you do? He's an hour away, and I called him, and I was like, "Jason, it's bad."
Yes. Man, this is probably a obviously, it's a fairly traumatic event for Jerry, but for me as well, because we were trying to talk about this, going over the nitty-gritty details, but my mind has mentally blocked almost that whole scenario. But what I do remember was it was around the feeding time for the boys, and I'm sitting there trying to feed twins of, your twins out there. You know how that is. You want to do them at the same time. So I'm trying to hold the phone here, feed the boys, or hold them and rock them or something. There was a lot going on. And then Jerry calls me and she gives me this news. And, if it's bad, and she actually gives me a timeline to live. And I'm like, what? I've got the boys crying in my arms. We're not making any money. I don't even have barely a part-time gig. I don't even remember if I was accepted into flight school yet. My wife is telling me that she's dying now, and I distinctly remember, and I might get some flack for this, but it was one of the first times I ever really was, like, yelling at God, and I was holding the boys, I was like, "God, what the fuck?" I felt led to come here. Here I am, and all this is happening. Like, what is going on? Why? And yeah, it was just chaos.
It really was chaos, and it was, like, so much, and there was, like, so many emotions happening, like, all over the board, I think, and I will get into the spiritual part of all of it when I talk to Huntress, but I was having a lot of emotional turmoil myself, but I just remember being like, "I have to tell Jason, and our babies are at home," and I was like, "I don't know how else to break this news other than to just tell him."
Yeah, real quick, just going back to the flight school thing, just a quick caveat. For those looking to go to flight school, it's honestly not that hard because you make it through the hoops and jumps and leaps and stuff to get there, and they really want you to pass. It's like a 98% pass rate. We had a lot going on during the time, and I am my own worst enemy when it comes to academics and things like that. That's going to be another story probably for later on. Eventually, I ended up having a mental breakdown during the time I had to take a knee. Anyways,
So, as you can hear, it has been a wild ride. Diagnosis itself was a wild ride, but then we also moved a few weeks later after my diagnosis. You guys have heard the story. I was in and out of the hospital when we were in Alabama. I was constantly driving back and forth 4 hours in one direction. And I was taken by ambulance twice when we were in Alabama. It was a really tumultuous time in our relationship, and it wasn't even just that my diagnosis was happening, like, we had twin babies, and Jason was in flight school, and that was rough in itself, and if you have an aviator husband, you would know what that means. Flight school is really hard, and so we had just a really rough few years. And mind you, we had only been married at the time. I think this was in years 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 were better-ish because we got the hang of it. But when I came out of the hospital, Jason had to help me change my dressing for my IV. We had to sterilize. He had to wear gloves. He had to help me clean the dressing. Do you remember all of that?
Yeah, so when it came to taking care of Jerry and this whole process of changing her medicine, and Jerry, do you remember when the first few times we were so nervous we had to basically scrub in as if I was going into an OR and put on gloves, mask, everything in order to wipe down the area we're about to change the dressing and make sure everything was sterile. Like, it was a big process, and we were trying to take it as serious as possible. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen some of the older pictures of her sites and how we just thought that's just the way it's going to look. And we come to find out later on, not the case. But yeah, it was intense. But it's just one of those things that got thrown our way. Instead of sitting there complaining about it, we just both just dove right in, and we're into this together, and we're going to figure this thing out. If this is what we got to do, hey, whatever, we got to do it.
Yeah, and I say it all the time, especially when, like, our anniversary comes around, but, like, we really put in sickness and in health and in richer for poorer to the test. We have been through almost every one of our wedding vows except "Till death do us part," I think. And it was really hard. And we have gotten so good at communication. I was telling one of my young adults last night, we were long distance for a little while, so our communication was good anyway. But then to also have to handle the mental aspect of everything that was going on, school, having babies, a new being a new mom, being a new dad, and then also having this life-changing diagnosis, it was like a heap of shit. And it was just so hard. But we have come out on top, and I'm, like, very thankful for the marriage that we're in, and I'm thankful that Jason has always been steadfast, and he's always been a great foundation for our family. He's always been the rock, and he did not waver, and my heart breaks for people whose spouses leave them when they get a life-changing diagnosis. But when we got this diagnosis, it was not a question about whether he was gonna stay. It was just a matter of how the heck do we navigate from here on out? And it breaks my heart for the people who have all this crap happening, and then they end up also going through a divorce on top of that. So our marriage has been put to the test, but the reason you say those vows at the end of the day is because that is the kind of stuff that gets thrown your way. And marriage doesn't make it easier. Marriage actually makes it harder because now you're in it, hopefully forever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go off of those things too, I'm a people pleaser to a fault. And some of the things I've had to learn through this whole thing was to essentially put my foot down when it comes to work or other obligations and practice saying no, or have to sometimes even tell bosses that I can't go on a mandatory training, whether it was through the reserves or through work, sending me down to the border and things. I tell them I just couldn't because I have to stay home and take care of my wife here, and that was hard at first having to tell people no because I didn't wanna get looked at as the guy who was trying to find every way out of things, but I just had to put my family first in a lot of those situations and stand up for that, and fortunately, my work ethic was shown around that and through that too, so it ended up working out good, but it was just an adjustment, a necessary one too. But even though this has all been really hard and tough, but it's been really good for us because we put time and everything into a different perspective. And so we go on dates and things more often than not. We kind of joke on our days off, okay, what are we doing together? But I know she wants to go do her own thing. But we haven't allowed this, the sickness and diagnostic get in between us. If anything, it's made us stronger.
It's definitely made Jason more obsessed with me. we spend a lot of time together, but it also what Jason said was it put a lot of things into perspective, and it also made us realize that this might not be forever. And like realistically, like PH could be what takes me out one day. And because of that, we don't want to look back and wish that we had gone on the trip, wish that we had gone on that date, wish that we had taken the extra time. And so we have prioritized our marriage, and I know I'm a parent, but I'm first and foremost, I'm Jason's wife. Second, I'm a mom. And I think that helps the boys realize what good marriages look like and sets an example for them that I love my marriage. And because I love my marriage so much, I'm a good mom and not the other way around. I'm not a good mom because I love my marriage. And I think that makes a big difference in our parenting journey too, and just how we prioritize things at the end of the day. I mean, in general, life has always been crazy for us, I think from the beginning, but Jason has been an ultimate caregiver. He is not only my caregiver, he's the breadwinner, obviously, and he takes care of me and he takes care of the boys. He takes care of me during Hell Week when I cannot do things. He steps up no matter what, which has been amazing and is such a blessing because I know that's not everybody's reality. But I also know that being a caregiver is really difficult, and I know that I've talked to a lot of patients whose caregivers are struggling, or somebody who is a caregiver to a PH patient who also struggles with their own stuff.
Yeah, you just gotta remember also as a caregiver, it's important to take care of yourself as well. So if you're fortunate enough to be in a relationship like ours, what I've learned is you can't really provide the necessary care you can for your family if you're also running on 10%, right? You got to remember, if all possible, to take care of your mental health and just do the things that you also like to do. For example, I finally got around to surfing the other day. I was doing terrible, but it was also awesome to get out in the water and just do the things that I like to do. And also, even if you can't do it every day or once a week or even once a month, try to plan it throughout the year. So later on this year, I booked this kind of men's retreat in October, I believe. It's 4 or 5 days out in Idaho with a bunch of dudes I don't know, but it's going to be a good time to just let go of all the electronics and just do a bunch of dude stuff. And I know I'll be better for it when I come back from that. I'll be recharged, refit, and be mentally more here and prepared to take care of Jerry and the family.
So just remember that if you are a caregiver, you are also a person and you should also be prioritizing yourself because you can't pour from an empty cup. And with that, I am so thankful that you guys joined us today. Thanks to my husband for hanging out with me more. And we are so thankful that you support me on this journey. Please subscribe and comment if you felt like this resonated with you. And I will be back next week. Thank you.